Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What is your best crazy ex-boyfriend story? Episode 2. I was in a really terrible relationship with a much older/insane guy when I was a dumb high schooler. I used to sneak out of the house and drive an hour to go stay with him. Anyways, the night really hit the fan. He got super physical and basically had me locked in his room with him while he was cutting himself, threatening to kill me/my family/his family, all that jazz. He had me take him out to the store for something, and as we were walking back to the house, he took my car key and basically chucked it up the sidewalk and told me not to go get it. Back in the house, he destroyed everything I had brought in with me: phone, clothing, wallet, money, shoes, but the worst, by far, was absolutely wrecking my glasses. We're talking mangled heap of metal, here. My eyesight is something like 380/20 in one eye and 410/20 in the other, so I can't see much more than colored blur 6 inches past my face. Anyways, after probably close to being stuck in the tiny room with a raging crazy for close to 6 hours, I convinced him to calm down. He fell asleep under the terms that I would as well, and that I couldn't leave the house while we were sleeping. Basically, ended up feigning sleep for about 5 hours when he wakes up and gets in the shower. I remember him sticking his face about 2 inches from mine for well over a minute, assuring himself I was asleep, I guess, before he went into the bathroom and started running the water. I turned into a soft-footed ninja and managed to get out of the house without so much as creaking a board. As soon as I was on the sidewalk outside, I dropped to my hands and knees and started groping around for the key to my car. I'd pretty much resigned myself to the fact that someone had picked up the key. This is Baltimore, after all, and should be running to the police station, but I was 17 at the time and just wanted to get in my car and get home. By some amazing goodness of karma, I found the key wedged in the crack between 2 squares in the wet sidewalk and proceeded to drive the hour home, praying frantically that I wouldn't be pulled over in my shoeless and bruised state. Chain smoking plus driving granny style with my face an inch from the steering wheel got me home safe. Phew. Anxiety heartbeats from writing this out. Anyways, not super, but I felt like Oda Cook and James Bond getting out of there. I was going to hang out with a friend, who's a guy, while I was living with my then boyfriend. I was wearing ankle socks with a pink stripe around the ankle. The ex took that as a sign that I was going to cheat on him. He took serious medications and didn't tell me until I asked one day why he wanted me to stand at the other end of the pharmacy we were at. At this point we had been together for 4 years. I had moved into his apartment in a rough city thousands of miles away from my home. I was depending on him financially until I got a job, of course, which he had agreed to. Emotionally, he was the only friend I had, etc. We were a step away from getting married. Just did not realize how crazy he was. Oh, he stalked me too. He was really good at it. I never would have known if he hadn't left postcards. Which was touching in a deeply perturbing way. I think in the end I just bored him out of stalking me. He wrote boring on one of the postcards. Rude. I finally got the courage to break it off with an abusive guy I was with from 15 to 27 years old. I kicked him out of the house and tried to cut all communication. After a few days of not responding to calls/texts, he showed up at my job. I called 911 immediately, and he left. About 10 minutes later, while preparing the room for my patient to show up, I looked up to find him standing behind me. He proceeded to beat me and kick me in the head multiple times. Thankfully, since I had dialed 911 and hung up, the police showed up. When he saw them come up the driveway, he calmly walked outside and put his hands behind his back. He served less than 3 months total for this. I was off work for a month because of a concussion. I had trouble driving, walking, and riding for a pretty long time. After breaking up with a guy that I had dated for 2 years, he went crazy. I should have seen the red flags earlier, but oh well. He would call and make up stories saying he was bleeding and didn't know what to do and needed me to come over to take care of it. I banged my knee into the bookcase, I hit my head on the freezer. He'd call sobbing and leave me countless voicemails. The worst was one night, about a month or so after we broke up, he called me, and I ignored it because I was on the phone with a friend. Since I didn't pick up, he got worried and drove over to my house. Mind you, it was about 2 a.m. at this point. I continued talking on the phone and started hearing a weird noise outside. I figured it was just some random drunk person and dismissed it. Well, it turned out to be him, and the next thing I know I feel something wet on my face. He had gotten a hose from my backyard and was starting to spray water into my bedroom window on the second floor. I yelled outside to stop, said goodbye to the person on the phone, and went down to talk to him. His excuse? He needed to use my Wi-Fi. I moved about 3 weeks after that incident, far away. When I was a college senior, dated a guy a fair bit older than me, with the failed logic that older meant more mature/wiser. In the 3.5 months of dating this guy, I realized that age is nothing but a number when it comes to sanity. Everything was normal for the first few weeks until some old health problems started popping up, resulting in hospital stays and really good medication. He went to get my refill one time and disappeared for a few hours while I was lying in the fetal position trying to not pass out from the pain. He returned drunk as a skunk and with only half of my controlled prescription because he decided to snort some. So, I wound up taking care of him that night. Another time he decided that he was too hungry to wait for me to be released from the hospital and left me while I was being checked out so he could get KFC. There are other stories from those days, but they blur into one long episode of him drinking, me crying, and male friends being threatened. Once my health had recovered, my first order of action was breaking up with him, taking advantage of graduation and my move to a new city to get away from crazy. While in the process of breaking up with think him sobbing/drinking, he decided to confess some highly illegal actions on his part, suffering from the delusion that since I was now aware of what he had done, I was a partner in crime and would stay with him. Contacted the people who needed to know about that and then filed a restraining order. Then it really hit the fan. First he crashed my graduation, which had enough drama thanks to my mom, and then proceeded to follow me to my graduation party, where he tried to punch me in the parking lot before getting drunk/thrown out/arrested of the restaurant. The next morning, he showed up, drunk, at my soon-to-be ex-apartment where my cousin blocked him, directing him back towards the bus stop and reminding him what a restraining order was. Apparently the lesson didn't sink in, and after calling my mom and convincing her that I needed to stay with him, he stalked out of the parking lot at my cousin's place waiting for us to show up. We got in the apartment to finish packing her up while my aunt showered. A few minutes passed before we heard the knocking. Saw him on the patio, gave him a warning that police officers were going to be called, again, which resulted in him pulling a gun and doing the whole "if I can't have you nobody can" story. Needless to say, police officers were called again, and he was escorted away in shiny bracelets. Last I heard, via a concerned friend who stayed in the area, he had just been released on parole due to his breakup confession. There's just so many to choose from with my last ex. A childhood friend of mine, JJ, calls me one morning to tell me his mom had died. She was a second mother when I was growing up and my mom's best friend. I told my BF about it and that I was going to the funeral the next day. So, after the funeral I offered to take JJ out to get some coffee to talk, 'cause no one at the funeral really knew his mom, they were all friends of his grandmother's. So, when I go to tell my BF this, he flips out saying that I spent the entire day with JJ, because watching your childhood friend from across the room cry for a few hours is spending the day with them, and then he left saying something about me lying to him about the funeral. Shrug. JJ ends up not being able to go for coffee and my BF is still somewhere being moody, so I went to the movies alone. I only have like on other friend and he was with my BF. When I was out late he asked where I was and I told him only for him to accuse me of being out with JJ. And his proof that I was lying is because I had shaved my legs earlier that day. That was our first argument, and it went downhill from there. Thankfully single now, lol. When I was about 17, I started dating a girl. We will call her Kay. It wasn't dating so much as we simply became a couple, and it all happened rather quickly and organically. We shared many friends, and that's actually how I met her. Anyway, fast forward about 6 months. I was in a period of my life where I was having wild difficulties. I had some suicidal ideations, although I wasn't sure where to turn and wasn't sure if I'd actually ever carry one out anyway. I was relying heavily on alcohol. I had been ramping up my intake for some time, although I didn't see a problem at the time. I now drink very rarely, and although I have some control issues, such as saying I'll stop at 2 pints, but actually stopping at 4, I do not get blackout drunk, and there is certainly much more restraint. One day I got the idea in my head that Kay and I did not actually have a lot in common. Which, upon reflection, is actually fairly accurate. I am much more intellectually oriented if that makes sense. So, I brought this up, and we broke up. She was crushed. I also think a key factor was just the fact that I liked the idea of stirring the pot. I didn't want things to stagnate and had started to rely on drama as a way out of that. Following that, there were numerous incidents where I had become drunk and belligerent. I was never intentionally cruel, I don't think. But I was not acting in a way consistent with any sort of social responsibility. I would mumble to myself, swear at friends, break down and cry, and once I was laying in the road saying I was going to let a car run me over. Obviously, I did not let it run me over, but she was crying and screaming at me during this event. Keep in mind we share the same friends, so I could not really get away from her. I still wanted her back, too. Fast forward again and I ended up at a party with a few friends, and naturally proceeded to get incredibly drunk. I am screaming as loud as I can, while I can hear them all laughing at me downstairs. And to be fair, I was being ridiculous at the time. This culminates in an eventual breakdown where I take a knife to my arms and beg her to tell me what she wants. And that if she wanted me to kill myself I would. Everyone is freaking out, and I slash my arms up fairly good. I eventually calmed down and apologized, saying I needed some gauze for my arms and that I'd go home. They told me to go to the hospital. I go to bed. So, yes, I don't think I could have been any worse of a boyfriend short of actually hitting her. I was pretty emotionally abusive, although not in an intentionally malicious way. I was just not in a good state of mind. I am doing much better now. My drinking is under control. I don't take knives to my arms. I am generally much happier. Kay is actually dating the friend whose house I slashed my arms in. And I'm fine with that. Further, I am actually particularly good friends with him, and Kay and I can exist in the same room without any awkwardness. Indeed, they both came to my NYE party, and we all had fun. Where does this put me? I don't know. I guess I am in the minority in that I have actually learned from what I did. My natural reflexive tendencies lead to the evaluation of what I was doing, and I inevitably realized that I needed to make some changes. Dealing with my alcohol addiction was the start as I yo-yoed between periods of sobriety and periods of drunken stupor, but I think I eventually just overcame it through sheer will. At least, I've overcome it to the point where alcohol is not a problem in my life, and I do not even think about it most days. To be honest though, this happened over several years, and there were many similar although less dramatic events during those times. I have not been the best person in my life, but I try not to judge myself too harshly about it and continue to learn and grow. This will probably be buried by this point, but like with the others, I have my own fair share of crazy ex-boyfriend stories. I'm not even sure where I should start, so I'll start with the end. It's safe to say that my ex was a nut job. There had been many issues with the relationship, but I tried everything I could to salvage it. I'm not sure why, with all the things he had done. He was a compulsive liar, a cheater several times over, he was immature and abusive. We had been together for nearly 3 years. We had an apartment together, he had moved into mine with no items but clothes. Needless to say, I regret it. When I was finally growing a pair during the exceedingly long breakup, initiated by him, he came to pick up some of his stuff. I had a few friends over. He requested that my friends leave. I didn't want them to just in case anything was to happen. They hid in the hallway up a flight of stairs. Once he was in the apartment, he seemed to go through a lull of the stage of grief in front of me. He got pushy and forceful and tried to meet me. He got angry and punched a wall several times inches from my face. He blamed everything on me. He tried everything. He then laid face first on the floor and refused to leave. I demanded he leave my apartment before I returned and joined my friends on the stairs until I heard him leave. A couple of hours later, after my friends and I got settled back into the apartment, I got a phone call. He's in the parking lot sitting in his car. He's yelling on the phone how everything was my fault, how he wanted my friends gone and for me to let him in. He has a gun. He threatens me. He threatens my friends. One of my friends comes into the room to listen quietly and comfort me. I'm in tears and begging my ex to leave us alone. His tone drops and he threatens suicide. He tried every direction. My friend beside me quietly exits the room and calls 911. He described the car, my ex, and my ex's possible intentions. I'm sobbing uncontrollably from what was going on the phone and in the apartment. I could barely speak when I told him that we had called the police officers. I hung up the phone. He sped out of the lot. The police officers came by and talked to me as they put a word out for him. He was caught doing 90 in a 30 zone, his gun was taken from him, and he was cuffed and taken to the hospital to have a psyche evaluation. The friends that were with me retrieved his car so that it wouldn't get towed. I spent the night sobbing in the arms of an officer and my friends. We will never forget that night. On a lighter note, I am now engaged to the man that called the police that night. A former friend of mine, for the purposes of this story, we'll call him Barry, was bipolar, very unstable, and on the rocks with his girlfriend, Sam, at the time. He had moved across the country to be with her, and back again, probably half a dozen times in the course of their 7-year, on-again, off-again relationship. Finally, she decided to call it quits. This girl happened to be best friends with another friend of mine, Kelly, who wanted me to drive to a club with them to go dancing. So, I went with them, and avoided questions about their breakup for the night. We got there, only to find that Barry was already waiting at the club. Naturally, everyone got hammered, arguments were had, and I stood back and watched everything unfold. Barry and Sam had their argument outside the club and eventually disappeared. Sam called Kelly an hour or two later and told her that he had given her a ride home, so we left. About 2 days later, Kelly calls me and says that Sam sent her a text that she was at Barry's place, and that he wasn't letting her leave. None of us want to get the police officers involved, so I tell her I'll take care of it, and I go over there. I knock on the door and don't get an answer, so I go around back and try to peek through the windows. I see shadows moving from the upstairs bedroom, so I take out my picks and get to work on the lock. As I crept upstairs, I could hear shouting. He was yelling something about how he gave up everything to be with her, and blah blah blah, lots of whiny stuff. When I got up to the bedroom, that's when it got real. He had his gun pointed at his head, she was crying, and he was threatening to kill himself if she left him again. I made a split-second decision at that instant. She sobbed and placated him, telling him that she would stay, and he set the gun down. That's when I came up behind him, took the gun, and pointed it at him. I told Sam to meet me outside, and I slowly backed out of the room with the gun trained on Barry. I dropped the clip and took the slide off, then tossed his gun aside. He looked at me and tried to ask me why, and I just said, "Don't." I drove Sam home and Barry called me a couple times. Finally, I picked up the phone and told him to get help before hanging up on him. I think that was the last straw for him. He left the state, and I haven't heard from him since. I was with my ex-boyfriend for almost 5 years. We broke up for a plethora of reasons. We had been growing apart for a long time, and I had really wanted to try and make it work. Unfortunately, it didn't. The spark had gone out, so to speak. The last straw was when we got into an argument over finances, and he slapped me across the face. He left for work shortly after that, and I went out with my best friend who was in town for the weekend. I broke up with him the next day. Fast forward to almost 2 years later. I was living with a mutual friend of ours, and he had a birthday party one night. I'm not huge on parties, so I decided to go out for coffee with a girlfriend of mine. I came home and noticed that all of my BDSM gear was missing. 2 collars, some wrist cuffs, a couple leashes, whips, crops, etc., etc. I talked to the people at the party, and they all said that the only person that had gone in my room was my ex. He flatly denied ever going into my bedroom. Whatever. I let it go. I hate arguing. I got a call from the friend that I was living with, a month or so after that. It turns out, my ex had used all of my BDSM gear along with a couple of shirts of mine to create a shrine to me in his closet. Yes, folks, we're thinking Helga Pataki levels of stalking here. His girlfriend had found it, resulting in him breaking down and crying to her that he couldn't throw it away, because if he can't have me, he wants to have my things. So, I found this sweet, quiet, Christian guy. He seemed normal at first. I even met him while working at a Bible camp for the summer. His name was Levi, and for the first week, Levi was a completely regular boyfriend. Then he transferred to a different camp, 4 hours away. Since he'd worked at the same camp as me before, he knew what my schedule was. Carrying a cell phone on the job wasn't allowed, but he still demanded that I check in several times a day. I was supposed to text him when I woke up at 7 in the morning, before I ate lunch at 11:45, before I ate dinner at 5 o'clock, and after the daily work meeting at 9 o'clock. If I didn't text him within 2 minutes of the exact times, he would call me until I did text him, rant on my voicemail about how I'm avoiding him, I'm a bad girlfriend, I don't love him like he loves me, I must be cheating on him. He had my day off schedule memorized, and if I didn't spend all day on the phone with him, he would be offended and would do all of the above again. One night I got fed up with my job and decided to intentionally ignore my curfew. Each employee is allowed 4 curfew violations. So, I went out to Applebee's with a group of friends that I hadn't seen in years. I mentioned this to Levi, which, by the way, was a bad idea. He immediately flipped out, begging me to break up with him. He said he loved me too much to leave me, so if we ever broke up, I would have to do it. He kept quoting Bible verses about obeying the authority that God placed above me. He was just furious that I would even consider breaking the rules. I ended up hanging up on him and turning my phone off for the night. The next morning, he calmly texted me that if I ever ignored his guidance again, he would consider me a lost cause and break up with me. I stopped really caring after that and didn't text him on his deadlines again. Unfortunately, that was a week before both of our camps ended, so it didn't end our relationship. This would have saved me another month of my life. We both went back to the same city. Me because I live there, and him because he went to college there. It seems that at some point I'd surrendered my soul to Levi, because he seemed to think that he owned me. I was 17 and had just graduated high school a year early. I figured I could spend the extra year working and save up funds for college. Levi was pretty upset with that plan. He said I needed to spend time with him, and as my boyfriend, he had to be my first priority, or I obviously didn't love him. From the moment I woke up, I had to spend time with him. The time he spent in classes was the only time we spent apart, period. He used to read what time my alarm was set for on my phone. One morning it was set for 8 a.m., and I didn't text him good morning until 8:07. He was furious and kept asking why I didn't care about him. After a while, he began demanding that I stop speaking to any of my friends, male or female. It was at this point that I decided I should just continue being myself, and he would break up with me. He was constantly crying that all of his past girlfriends had broken up with him, so he was unlovable, and when he was angry or sad, he would yell and become violent. I just didn't want to be the breakupper because I knew the scene he would cause. It lasted a few weeks before Levi approached me and told me that there were certain terms to being in a relationship with him, and if I didn't want to abide by the terms, then he couldn't be with me any longer. Naturally, the relationship ended right there. I didn't hear about him again until one of my mutual friends informed me that he had been spreading rumors about all of my past crushes and boyfriends abusing me. Evidently word on the street now is that everyone I'd ever loved was terrible, and Levi was my savior. Good stuff. My ex-boyfriend moved to New York shortly after we ended an 8-month relationship. It was a sad breakup for me, since I was really falling for him. After several excruciating weeks of him calling and making me miss him more, I eventually sent him an email essentially saying, "Please stop contacting me, I need to get over you." Cue a month or two passing, I am having some drinks with a couple friends on a Saturday night. I got a random text from the ex, a simple "I thought of you today." I send back a miffed response, "Please leave me alone." He responded with, "If you're ever close enough to hit me, I'll be close enough to meet you." The only thing that rang crazy for me was how random and uncalled for it was. I didn't even know how to respond, so I didn't. I do have that text saved just in case, though. Well, I had been dating a guy on and off throughout high school, and it wasn't an extremely healthy relationship. He was just using me, and would say rude things to me. I'll start off with the story of how things ended finally. My friend, a girl, let's call her C, had invited me to come hang out with her and some of our mutual friends, which included guys, at one of their houses, a boy's house. I was getting ready to leave when I got a call from my, now ex-boyfriend, let's call him W. He asked me what I was doing. I told him that C had invited me to go hang out with her and some friends. I didn't mention where because I didn't think it was important. Big mistake. We get off the phone and I continue getting ready when I get another phone call from him, and he is irate. Apparently he had called around. I'm not sure how he acquired this information, and found out that I was going to, God forbid, a guy's house and was angry that I didn't mention this in our previous conversation. It was a mixed group of people, and the location just happened to be one of the guy's houses. I didn't think it was important. But he was irate, telling me that he just can't trust me anymore, and how he wasn't sure how our relationship was going to work without trust. I was at my wit's end with this guy, so I just told him that we were through, and I hung up on him. After I hung up on him, I left to go to my friend's house, and he would not stop calling. I answered once to tell him to stop and then hung up, but he wouldn't stop. Eventually, I just turned off my phone thinking that would stop him. LOL, nope. He proceeds to call each of my friends, asking where I was. I didn't him which friend's house I was at, and such. Eventually, he figured it out and decided to come over to my friend's house to talk to me. My car wasn't there, my friend picked me up, so they answered the door and told him that I had left already. He leaves, but continues to call my friends until they have to turn off their phones. The next day he called me again and asked me to come over to talk. In my naivety, I let him. Worst decision ever. We are talking in my room, I keep telling him we're done, I'm not getting back with you, etc., and he keeps trying to stick his tongue down my throat. Yuck. I stand my ground and he gets so frustrated that he grabs me by my hair and slaps me and leaves. I wait for a little bit in my room, I'm really shocked at this point, and I eventually walk and ask my brother, yes, my brother was home, to go check and make sure we had left. Once the coast was clear I went upstairs to find my mom, yes my mom was home too, and tell her what happened. My stepdad, yes he was home too, this guy had the balls to do this while my whole family was home, overhears, takes my phone, and calls W, and tells him to never step foot on our property again or else the police will get involved. After that W tries to keep calling me to ask if he can come by and give me something. I told him he could leave whatever outside the door, that I didn't want to see him. One time he left me a mocha from my favorite coffee shop, I love mochas, and I drank the $5 mocha right up. The second time he left something he got me flowers, I let my mom have them because she likes flowers. I know it might sound weird that we didn't just trash these things, but I felt bad, and even though he gave me these gifts I didn't talk to him at all, nor did I see him. After all these weird gift-giving events he continued to text me, I never replied, and they dwindled down in frequency. Sometimes they would be really mean, hurtful texts, and other times, they'd be texts asking to give him another chance. At first, he texted me weekly, then monthly, and then quite randomly, one that stuck out was, "Whose number is this?" I have no clue what that text was about, didn't bother responding to find out though. The last contact with me, he attempted was a phone call at some ungodly morning hour, 4 or 5 a.m. I think. I didn't answer and he left a voicemail, took a while to gather courage to listen to it, but I did and he said something like, "Hey, just thought I'd call you to let you know that I'm leaving this place forever. You were really important to me, and I just thought I'd let you know." The funny thing was that I already had plans to move out of state and it never once had crossed my mind to call and tell him. He can go rot in whatever state he went to. Oh, I forgot to mention that he had gotten into cocaine towards the end of our relationship, which may explain his erratic behavior. Wow, that was a much longer story than it seemed in my head. In Chechnya, there was a boy in love with a girl. About 17 years old. As is the tradition, the boy decided he wanted to marry the girl he wasn't dating, so he kidnapped her. Before their wedding took place, her parents discovered that she was missing and tracked her down to his house. The parents of the two families gathered to discuss the best course of action. Kidnapping could not be tolerated, so the boy's parents locked him in their attic and boarded up the windows. About 2 weeks later, the love-struck boy hatches a plan. He breaks the plywood board and jumps out of the third-story window to the ground below, breaking his leg. He runs across town, breaks leg and all, and kidnaps the girl again. The parents confer again, and decide that since he clearly loves her, the two should indeed get married. Today, the couple is married with 2 children. True story. When I was in high school, one of my exes decided he really liked the smell of my hair and cut off part of the back of my hair when we were at his house, and would apparently smell it whenever he missed me, because needless to say I dumped him when I found out. He then proceeded to buy the shampoo I used for himself, so he could smell like me. The kicker was the note that told me if he ever became a cannibal, I would be his favorite meal. I was extremely glad I graduated a month later and moved out of the state. I once dated this guy that I ended up moving in with, and due to his emotionally abusive nature because I was stupid, fat, and not to mention ugly, I moved out after only 3 months. I broke up with him as the U-Haul was coming up the driveway. It was dramatic. The whole time he was like, "I love you, I'll change all that," but I was pretty firm. I rented a U-Haul. I needed to haul something. A few days after I left, his parents called me encouraging me to get back together with him because it is being in a relationship. He would email, and call me all hours of the day and night, pleading for me to come back and that he was a changed man. A week after I left, I was checking my online checking account and noticed some weird charges. Turns out that he wanted me back so much that he stole my credit card number and purchased a shitload of subscriptions to online porn because nothing says "I love you" and "I'm a changed man" by buying a bunch of porn on your ex's credit card. I also dated this other guy, and when we broke up for like 2 months, he would send me cryptic song Modest Mouse lyrics between the hours of 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. It actually became quite exciting. I couldn't wait to get up the morning to see what weirdness would be on my phone. What was awesome though, when we broke up, I had left nothing at his house, but he called me anyway because he had bought a 12-pack of Orange Crush from the grocery store, and he wanted me to come get it. Spent 2.5 years with an emotional abuser. Finally got up the guts to break up with him. He didn't take it well, kept calling me, texting me, trying to get me to talk to him / work things out, telling me I never gave him a second chance, although staying with him after the hundreds of fights and times he made me cry were all the second chances. He kept showing up at my place late at night when he knew I'd be home. One night I'd been hanging out with friends and not at home. I'd finally made it home and he was hanging out at the end of the dead-end street near my place and drove up and blocked me into my driveway, refusing to leave until I locked myself into my house for an hour yelling at him to go away. His number blocked from reaching my phone through my cell phone carrier. He started emailing me, at one point just asking for help. I finally stopped by to stop him from trying to kill himself, and he proposed to me. I walked away, and he fell on the ground and started vomiting. I had to call his best friend so he could come to help him. I finally moved to a new place to get away from him, created email filters to block the email addresses that he kept creating just to email me with. About 3 months after the breakup, my birthday came around, and apparently he called my best friend up and lied about showing up to my old place with a car he had promised to fix and give me 2 years previously, and with 24 roses. I'm allergic to all kinds of flowers and hate them. The reason I know he was lying about it was that about 3 weeks before my birthday, I was informed he had shown up at my place to try and talk to me again and realized I had moved. Fast forward to 4 months after my birthday, I'm seeing a new guy. Things are going great. I've refused to post anything about the new relationship on Facebook or any photos, out of the fear of him somehow seeing it, despite him being blocked and all of his friends blocked as well. Well, I finally posted a photo of my new boyfriend and I accidentally posted as my Facebook profile photo, and less than 3 hours later, my ex shows up at my new place and proceeds to pound on my door. I call the cops. And before they get there, my ex has busted in my boyfriend's windshield and taken off. Luckily, he moved to Australia. This was confirmed by trustworthy people, about 2 weeks after all of this garbage. My ex was away, and I missed him, so I decided to Google his screen name, more out of a desire to read things he wrote and smile rather than in a stalking capacity. I found posts which were definitely by him all over a white supremacy site, saying things about how it's necessary to keep the white blood pure and have beautiful white babies, not ugly brown ones. I'm a brown girl. I had been dating this guy for about 7 months when he started getting possessive and controlling, who I could talk to, what I needed to wear, and that I needed to marry him, etc. I found out he was cheating, so I met with him to confront / break it off. He got pissed at me, so he tried to slam my finger shut in the glove compartment, then ripped off a necklace from my neck that he had bought me, and then proceeded to drive the car into oncoming traffic until I physically had to take the wheel. I broke it off with him, which wasn't acceptable in his eyes. He would come to my job, call me nonstop, threaten to kill himself if I leave him, and he tried to make my parents believe that he didn't do anything wrong, and I had made it all up. I had to deal with that for an entire 3 months after I broke up with him. Talk about hell. I went on a few dates with a guy in my senior year of high school. He went to an all-boys prep school, and obviously, I didn't. After hanging out a couple times, it seemed like neither of us were really feeling it, so we went our separate ways. The first year of college goes by, and we talk maybe once or twice, and at the end of the school year we both come back to the city we are from for the summer. We didn't speak all summer, and I had completely forgotten about this guy, being so busy getting ready to go back to school. My whole family went out of town for a night and left me at home. I went out with some friends, and it ended up turning into an all-night party. I finally headed home about 6 a.m., and as I pulled up to my parents' house, I saw a huge pile of dirt in the driveway. I'm talking huge. It was smack dab in the middle of our 3-car driveway, and was as high as an entire floor of the house. Just then my phone goes off, and I look to see a text from this guy saying, "That's what you get for not being with me, you bitch." Needless to say, I parked in the street and booked it inside, locking all the doors. It was to explain to my parents when they got home a few hours later, and the part that always made me angry was the fact that he wasn't even an ex. He was a nothing. Weirdo. I was dating a guy in college. Then I went home for the summer. Once I was away from him, I was able to see what a manipulative jerk he was. So, I broke up with him and started seeing someone else. He found out about it and called my parents and left messages on their answering machine. I fortunately intercepted those messages. When I got back to college in the fall, I no longer had a place to live, was planning to share an apartment with said ex and 6 other people. I got someone to take my room before I got there. So, I struggled to find a place to stay while I was trying to arrange housing. However, a few of my things were at his apartment, so I went to get them. He knew I was coming, and spray painted my furniture with harsh words. I called the police officers. By the time I got there with the police officers, he had spray painted over the words, and claimed to have no knowledge of what happened to it. Yes, right. So, I collect my things, and move them to a friend's apartment. He cons said friend into letting him in, and destroys a ton of my stuff. I called the campus police, and they told me that they can't do anything because it happened off campus, and the city police told me that I have no evidence. I went to the courthouse to get a restraining order against him. However, I made the mistake of telling him that I was going to do that when he called the place that I was staying to talk to me. Why exactly did my friends keep telling him where I was? When I got to the courthouse, the clerk didn't want to give me a restraining order because he had come in earlier with his parents, and asked them not to say that he would leave me alone. I was floored. The police had told me that I could try pressing criminal charges, so I asked if I could do that. The court magistrate told me that I didn't have enough evidence. So, I started sobbing, telling them that I was afraid for my life. The magistrate told me I could get a restraining order, at which point I said I tried, and they wouldn't let me. The magistrate made the lady who my ex had conned into thinking he'd leave me alone fill out the paperwork for the restraining order. However, she told me my hearing was 1 p.m., but scheduled it for 10 a.m. So, I showed up for my court date to get the permanent restraining order in place, and I was told I had missed my date, so I was out of luck despite the fact that I had a paper that said my court date was a 1. Apparently, they only hear restraining order cases at 10 a.m. By that point, I had already figured out that I couldn't stay in that city or graduate from my college. I was a senior, so I moved back home. A mutual friend of ours told me that my ex told him that it was a good thing I'd gotten the temporary restraining order because he wasn't sure what he would have been capable of. The magistrate made the lady who my ex had conned into thinking he'd leave me alone fill out the paperwork for the restraining order. However, she told me my hearing was 1 p.m., but scheduled it for 10 a.m. I am a girl. I go to bars alone, sometimes after work, and read the newspaper, and have a nightcap. I did this all the time in SoCal, and really never got bothered by anyone. Fast forward to moving to NorCal. One evening I was in a bar with a girlfriend and some real redneck man started talking to me. My girlfriend was talking to someone, so I was very uninterested, not a word I know, in talking to this man for about 10 minutes. After my friend got done talking to her friend, we left. I ran into this bro, probably like 4 to 5 times in the next few weeks at various neighborhood establishments. One of the nights I ran into him, my lanyard for work disappeared, and this man magically had my number after that. I asked him even if maybe he had picked up my lanyard, and he said no, that I had given him my number. I hadn't, even upon asking both my girlfriend and the bartender that waited on me the night that my lanyard got stolen out of my purse. I never once arranged to meet this guy anywhere, and he basically figured out which places I went and would just be there. Since I go to bars, I just figured, well, I'm new in town, and clearly he's a regular at a lot of places. Then one evening I'm talking to a friend of mine that worked at another place I went to, and he said he had talked to Psycho at some point and Psycho told him we were dating. Because ripping off a girl's phone number and showing up at places she goes is dating. By this point I had a boyfriend, so I was really perplexed by this. A few months later my boyfriend and I were out watching football and this man shows up trashed and almost got into a fight with my boyfriend, but he was so drunk no one knew why or what he was saying. Another time about 2 weeks later he showed up at the pub while I was waiting for my girlfriend to get off work so I could drive her home. He walked up to me and poked me in the ribs and asked me why I hadn't been around lately, and I told him politely to leave me alone. He was kicked out of the bar, and when I went to drive my girlfriend home I realized someone had stabbed the back tire of my car. I was going to a party with my girlfriends, and when we were walking to the house my boyfriend pulled up next to us and demanded I get into his car. When I refused, he started to threaten to call the police officers and have the party busted. I was 19. Words were exchanged, and I finally took one for the team and got into the car. He then drove out to a park, got out of the car with the keys, and disappeared for about an hour and a half. I wasn't from this city, and had no idea where the park was, so was stuck there until he finally returned. He claimed he did this because he didn't want me to go to the party. So instead of just asking me not to go, I pretty much got kidnapped. Aside from being a liar and a cheater, my crazy ex had a few crazy highlights. I am also convinced that he has a borderline personality. Looking back, he would go into a fit of rage for nothing. One incident of an unwarranted fit of rage was when he had decided he wanted to go to the mall about 45 minutes away because he wanted to get a salad at a particular place in the food court. We went along with one of his friends, and I got food at another store. He totally went mental on me right in the food court. The second incident I can think of was one night that our roommate had made chicken Alfredo, and he flipped out on me because the chicken had been cut into varying sizes instead of being all the same size. When I said, well, the roommate made it, he shut up. Psycho. Mind you, he was over 30 years old at the time of these things, and it was not long after the second incident that I told him it was over. He was fine with this. I learned after the fact that he already had a new girlfriend, until he found out I had been starting to date, at which point he called DHS claiming that I was abusing/neglecting my child and hacked into my email and sent messages to everyone in my address book saying that I had cheated on him and given him STDs. He also claimed to be allergic to mushrooms. One time we saw that a sandwich he was eating contained mushrooms, and he didn't know it, and nothing happened. Just an overall crazy douche. Well. Where to begin? Pretty much anything you can think of, I went through with one particular guy. The craziest story I can recall at the moment is this: in bathroom, getting ready to go to my roommate's mom's house. Ex passed out on cough. Suddenly he wakes up and comes into the bathroom, asks me where I am going. To roommate's mom's house. Out of nowhere he shut the bathroom door with both of us in, started screaming and punching the wall. The smell of vodka reeked from his breath. He pulled out the towel bar and started hitting himself with it. I freaked out, pushed my way out of the bathroom and into our room. While all lived together, he got through the bedroom door, got on top of me, and pinned me to the bed. Blood was pouring from his nose from beating himself up, like WTF, and all over my face and upper body. I don't even remember what he was saying, but he was going nuts. I got loose, grabbed my laptop bag, and got to the living room. I was trying to make a run for it. As I grabbed the front doorknob, he grabbed the back of my shirt and flung me across the room. I landed back first on a table and broke a glass underneath me. Somewhere in between this all, I had managed to call a friend and she was on her way over to get me. We fought in the living room for a while, until somehow, I don't even remember. I managed to jump out of the living room window onto our front porch and ran down the apartment stairs into the parking lot. Friends were already there, jumped in her car and we booked it. You'd think it ends here, but it doesn't. I got to her house and was in panic and shock. I was in the bathroom at her house changing out of my bloody clothes and cleaning the blood from my body. Then I hear yelling, thumping, and all of a sudden, EX bursts into the bathroom. He had driven his drunk ass all the way there. He just wanted to talk. My friend was outside the door. I yelled for her to call the police officers. She did. Once he knew they were on their way, he left the bathroom, and I had left my laptop bag sitting in the hallway. He grabbed my computer and threw it across her hardwood kitchen floor, and he also grabbed a golf club my friend had brought in for protection. He ran outside and started clubbing her car in. He smashed the driver's side door and front windshield before bailing into the night. Cops came, he got arrested. I chain smoked like hell the rest of the night. My ex, long-distance relationship, wouldn't let us be Facebook friends until about 17 months into our relationship. We broke up at 18. More on that. He freaked out when I talked to his friends or twin, wouldn't introduce me to his other brother, and was very vague about whether his friends or family knew about me at all. When I would ask him how his nights out went, he would accuse me of being controlling and suffocating, and when I got upset that he had become friends with an ex he had told me he hated, he called me immature, naive, and a psycho controlling for trying to control who he was friends with. Towards the end of the relationship, he treated me badly, especially when I said I didn't trust him fully. Turns out I was right. He was seeing this skank behind my back for half our relationship. Oh yes, and when I went to visit him, before I found out he had been cheating on me continuously, he tried to pressure me. Which thankfully didn't happen. After we broke up, he continued to lead me on, one day cussing me out and blaming me for his cheating, the next telling me he cried himself to sleep over losing me. Finally figured out how to block him on most fronts. The last message I got from him was last month, almost 2 years after we broke up, LOL. I replied with you, take a hint and get out of here. Tell her, the ladies will appreciate the whole thing. This will probably be buried, but thought I'd share anyway. He made me a smarter woman. My first boyfriend lasted about 2 weeks, and we were both all over each other, because neither of us had ever had a BF before. Anyway, he breaks up with me after saying that a bunch of people are talking about us behind our backs, including my sister. Now, I'm the kind of person who people don't really talk about behind my back. Everyone kind of loves me, not to sound pompous, but it's pretty much true, and it turns out that, nope, no one had been talking about us. Fast forward a few months, and I've been dating this other guy for a while. I had just gotten home from an awesome date with him, and guess who decides to IM me? Ex number 1. I mention that I'm dating new BF, and he says that he made out with new BF a week or so ago. Turns out to be true, however, I forgive new BF, bad idea. New BF dumps me a few months later, after constantly breaking dates and being an ass, and ex number 1 decides to try and get back together with me, despite having gotten my last BF to cheat on me with him. It took all of my willpower not to strangle him on the spot. He still sometimes drunkenly texts me trying to get back together, and apparently drinks like a fiend while still a teenager. I married the crazy who kept it well hidden until we were married, bummer. I've always enjoyed video games, and so when I got into playing games online and meeting online friends there, my husband got crazy jealous. He put a keylogger on my computer and would log into my email, MySpace, when MySpace was the social network, etc., to make sure I wasn't cheating on him. He never even bothered to talk to me about it. I found out he felt that way when I found the keylogger in a spyware scan. And for the record, no, I was not flirting with anyone else, nor was there any logical reason for him to suspect that of me. On top of that, I would wake up in the middle of the night to him. He wouldn't even make sure I was awake first. Creeped me out and made me feel pretty violated. When I would get about it, he would swear he was asleep and didn't know he was doing it. It got to the point that I bought a king-size bed and slept with a row of pillows in between us, and as far away from him as possible, to keep it from happening. Come to find out whether he was telling the truth or not, I can't say. When we were going through our divorce, gee, I wonder why it didn't work, he would call me and say, I'll give you the washer/dryer. Which I refused. He also stole my doormat. When I asked him if he had done it, he admitted it, and when I asked why, he said, because that was the only way I could get to you. Really? The saddest part about this is that he was a pretty normal man until we got married. I dated someone who was the guitarist and singer for a popular local regional band who was a tad too young for me. I meant to have a quick summer fling, but after we slept together, he immediately posted on his live journal, yes I know it, that he had a girlfriend. He begged me to be able to tell his best friend, the singer in the band, who told the rest of the band who announced we were dating at a large local show. So that cat quickly jumped out of the bag in 48 hours. I moved into my own apartment, and he slept over 1 night, 2 nights, 5 nights, and finally I told him to go home. So, he did for 1 hour before returning to my place with groceries, a bag of clothing and other things like he was moving in. While he stayed with me somehow, not from me, he caught the moon. He also used my toothbrush without telling me and, man, germs on my bristles. After he got mono, he went to his parents' place to see a doctor and for the funeral of one of his aunts. While away he stopped talking to me or responding to my voicemails on his phone. So, I figured that was done. Nope. He would cruise into town for band practice or hanging out only to show up at my place at midnight, 2 a.m., 5 a.m., and once 6:30 a.m. looking for results. Since his band was huge, he also played every big show I attended that year, so it was impossible to avoid him too. So, when he showed up at my place at 4 a.m. one night drunk and refused to go away, I had taken to ignoring his knock, and once he tried to crawl into my first floor bedroom window, I finally said that I wanted to just be friends. At first, he was like, cool, and we had Chinese food afterward together. Then he decided to be a dick at a show his band played I was photographing, tried to break my camera with his guitar, and after the show he punched me for coming up to him to be like, hey, can you not be a dick to me when I am photographing bands? I like my camera, and it's pensive, dude. I started dating my best friend. Man would show up, now, at 7 a.m., 10 a.m., 8 a.m. randomly. He had a cell phone, but wouldn't call. He'd also show up on holidays. He did this for 3 years running while I was living with my boyfriend. Once he came over a 2-year post-breakup after hearing my ex-boyfriend propose to me to return some cookbook I'd lent him. For years later, he called me when my ex-boyfriend broke up with me to talk and get closure. My friend, who was this dude's roommate, said that this guy asked if he could read my locked live journal through him. He said that man used to stalk my online accounts and talk about me something like 4 years later. All told, we maybe dated for like 2.5 months too. I only dated him for a month or so. He was an ass most of that time. After we broke up, he sent a huge bouquet of flowers to my work. He also called me constantly. One night I was hanging out with a coworker and some friends, and he would not stop calling. Finally, I answered, and when he asked what I was doing, I said, "I'm hanging out with Harry, my very large coworker, here, talk to him." So, I handed the phone over to Harry, and he was very pleasant to my ex. When Harry went back to get his car, all of the windows had been smashed out. Yes, the ex. Another time, I somehow ended up at his house, and no idea how, I was pretty drunk. He managed to get me into the garage to talk. The talk turned out to be him throwing around and smashing all of his things while screaming about me not loving him. Yes, that was nice. Ran into him about a year ago, made eye contact, and not a word was spoken.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.